Have you ever wanted to try leatherworking, and do you like Witch Hat Atelier? Because if so, then this video is for you. Today we're going to be making a Leather Palm Quire from the manga series Witch Hat Atelier. Hi guys, it's Bats, and it has been a long time. I had intended to release this video much earlier on in the year along with the rest of my Coco build series, but unfortunately life has been very crazy and very busy. As you can see, I am in a new location because I have finally moved into my new flat in my new office, which I am very excited about. I have also started a new position at work, and just life has been crazy in general, so it's taken a while, but I'm very excited to finally release it. For those of you who haven't seen these videos yet, one, you should go watch them, but second of all, you probably don't know that I was making this costume for a competition back in April, and one thing that I really wanted to do was to spice it up with accessories where I could. Now, the witches wear these things called witches' belts, which usually they have their palm quire attached to, as well as their ink and their inkwell. I've been wanting to make a palm quire for my 𝐋𝐢𝐧𝐤𝐬 cosplay for the longest time, so I thought it would be super cute and fun to add it to my Coco cosplay and to spice it up for competition a little bit. Instead of making it out of something like EVA foam, I would make it out of leather. Not only will this feel more natural to the universe that Coco has come from and follow that path of using all natural materials, which was my goal for this costume, but it also means that it is a lot more sturdy and will be able to handle a lot of wear and tear and handling, which is good because I intend to use this quite a lot. Before we get into the making of this video, there is a couple of important things that I really want to mention. The first one being that I am not a professional when it comes to leatherworking. I did do a costuming degree a couple of years ago, so I am in a sense a professional in costuming. However, when it comes to leatherworking, I have only done a couple of weeks of classes on leatherworking, so I know enough to know the basics, the materials, the tools, the dyes, the tooling techniques, etc. But I've only ever really made one thing in my life when it comes to leatherworking, so I'm still trying to figure out basically everything. So I guess what I'm getting at is, in this video, maybe don't use what I say as gospel, and definitely do some of your own research, because I don't want to be the blind leading the blind. I only know the basics, so don't take what I say for gospel. But one thing I do really want to show you, because I really love it still, is the one thing that I did make in leatherworking when I did my course was this van brace. Oh my god, it's so cute. I still love it. It's really not perfect, but this is the only thing I've ever made besides this palm quire. It's like a gold van brace that has this rose detailing and tooling on it. I did do two of them, but I didn't finish the detailing on this one, so you can see the like before and after the shading. They're cute as hell, so sorry you have to deal with me showing them off. There is one more very important thing that I need to mention before we get into the gist of this video, and that is that if you want to recreate any of the tooling or the work that I do in this video, one, you're gonna have a very hard time doing it on something like EVA foam, and you're probably gonna need to look at something more like an armor building video for that. And if you want to recreate it on leather like I am doing, you will need to use a type of leather called 𝙏tan leather as opposed to a faux leather or a �10 tan leather. And I will get into the gist of why that is. If you're not interested in hearing about the big info dump I'm about to give, and you just want to see the fun of the build, then jump to this timestamp and we can get straight into it. So for those of you here for the info dump, here is why, and please excuse me because I need to read off of my laptop with my notes on it here because I have a little bit to say. 𝙏tan leather is dyed or tanned using natural tannins extracted from plants, leaving it with a more natural finish. Chrome tanned leather, which is generally a leather that looks like this, you can buy it from your local fabric store. It's kind of used on like bags and purses and shoes, etc, etc. That one is tanned using something called chromium salts, which stabilize the leather. Because of these chromium salts, it holds dye really well and won't take on the water like 𝙏 tan leather does. But in order to do tooling, you really need the leather to be able to absorb the water to become soft and malleable, so that we can create these deep indents in the leather and make patterns, kind of like you see what I've done here. The way chrome tanned leather is finished with this kind of shiny glossy finish won't allow for you to make these deep indentations in the surface of it, as it won't allow the leather underneath to absorb the water and become soft and malleable. Now, faux leather, which is the stuff that you see at your fabric store as well, is a different situation where it's not even leather really. It is a woven fabric, which you can see when you look at the other side of it, and it's basically just got like a rubber synthetic plastic coating on the top, so you won't even be able to do any type of tooling on it. If you want to use faux leather for a project like this, you're gonna have to do some kind of top stitching, whether you put batting underneath and then you top stitch the design to kind of create that like depth perception of it, or do embroidery or something, but you're not going to be able to do the type of tooling that we're going to do in this video. Right, that is the info dump done, so now we can get into the actual making video. To start off, I have these pre-cut circle-sized scraps that were already with the leather that I had, so I'm using this as kind of a size reference to figure out what size I want my palm quire to be. First, I'm making a pattern for the cover using a drinking glass that was roughly the right size because I don't own a compass, I guess. Next, I'm going to be roughly drawing out the pattern that is going to go on the cover. I believe that this is actually supposed to be on the inside cover of the palm quire, but the cover of the official palm quire is actually pretty plain, and 𝐋𝐢𝐬𝐴 actually released a merchandise palm quire that has this design on the front, so we're going to put it on the front. I'm also adding a little flap, which I'm gonna add a snap closure to so that the palm quire can close. It is probably important to mention that I'm not entirely sure how thick this leather is that I'm using. I think it's roughly 3mm with the smaller 1mm piece to compare. I'm gonna go with a thicker leather because I think it'll be more sturdy and look nicer, and it's gonna hold its shape a lot nicer than like a flimsy little piece of 1mm leather. To transfer the pattern onto our leather, I'm going to be using some cold water and this little plastic sculpting tool. You can pretty much use any blunt, dull object for this. You want to make sure that you don't cut the surface of the leather, you're just leaving a slight indentation that you can see once the leather dries. It is also very important to note here that you need to use cold water. Do not use boiling hot water because it will harden your leather. Cold water will do just fine. Then once your pattern is transferred and your leather has dried out, you can then cut out the shape using either a box cutter or some sharp leather scissors. I generally prefer to use a box cutter though. I can't remember what this tool is called, but the next thing that we're going to do is wet our leather again, and we are going to create a little like stitch guide indent along the edge of the leather using this. I tried using it on the cover of my palm quire, but it wasn't quite as wide as I wanted it to go, so I did a little test so you can kind of see what it's supposed to look like, and instead I'm going to use this jar lid, which seems to be the right size, and I'm just going to go around the edge of it using a smooth stamping tool. Anytime you're doing any tooling, you need to make sure that you re-wet your leather. You'll know when it's time to dampen the leather again when you notice that the tooling isn't sticking as well and the leather starts to bounce back. When you're stamping the leather, you may also notice that the surface begins to split as it's drying, which we want to avoid. So if you notice that, make sure to wet your leather again. Now that the front piece is prepared, we're going to move on to the back cover. For the back piece, I've cut out another circle, and then using my box cutter, I've created these two slits on the back of the leather, which I'm going to thread my back strap through to hold the cover closed. I was initially going to put a snap on it, which I mentioned earlier in the video. However, when I looked at the size snaps I had, it looked a little bit goofy. So instead we're going to be creating this little back strap here. And as you can see, it's just gonna tuck in to hold it closed. You know what I mean? For the back, instead of doing that little indented line that we did on the front, I'm just gonna jump straight in and use my box cutter. As the back doesn't have a pattern on it like the front does, I just want to create a small, narrow border along the edge of the back cover just to give it a little bit of interest. Now that our back and our front covers are prepped, it is time to move on to the tooling. We're going to start with the back cover as that is the most simplest piece. To do our tooling, I'm going to make sure that my leather is lit again. To do the tooling, I'm going to make sure that my leather is lit. My leather is wet. Fuck's sake, why can't I say that? So that I don't have to keep repeating myself, when we do tooling, just always assume that I have wet my leather. Now to do the tooling on the back cover, I'm going to be taking this smooth, square-shaped shader and a rubber mallet, hammering along that cut line I just made. When you're doing your tooling, you need to make sure you're doing it on a solid, flat surface, as this will give your stamping a much better result. Usually a brick would work well for this, but I'm doing this inside and I don't really want to damage my floors, so instead I'm going to be using a chopping board that I use specifically for leatherworking. When you're going around the edge and you're doing your shading, just make sure that you're doing lots of light, consistent taps and you're holding that stamp very lightly and just gently moving it kind of in a gliding motion across the surface of the leather. This will prevent you from having any super obvious like stamp marks on the surface of the leather. On mine, you can kind of see I did still end up with some pretty obvious stamp lines around here. And this is a result of me still being pretty new to this, but with practice, you should be able to get rid of those very obvious lines and just end up with a nice smooth result. So now that all of our shading is done on the back cover, it is time to make our stitch holes because we are going to be doing this decorative stitch along the back border. Because leather is so thick and sturdy, you can't just push your needles through it like you do with fabric, so we actually need to go through and prep all of our stitch holes by punching them in with a tool called an awl, which is generally used for sewing, so some of you might already know what this is. To do this, I'm marking out how far apart I want each stitch hole, and then I'm taking my rubber mallet and an awl and I'm hammering the awl through the leather to create a hole. Again, doing this on my chopping board. Do not do this part on a brick because you will damage and blunt your awl. So now that all of our stitch holes are prepared, we are going to go ahead and we're going to finish off the edges of this palm quire before we move on to the front cover because we're going to do the stitching last. To finish off the back cover, I'm going to be beveling the edges, using my box cutter to round off the edges a little bit, just kind of carving away the leather. And then I'm gonna wet the edges and use an edge beveler to smooth it out a little. You can use pretty much any smooth object for this, like a bone folder. I've even used some folded up piece of paper, which worked pretty well, but an edge beveler is made for this, so it works pretty well. This gives a much more finished look to the edges rather than leaving them squared off and raw. Later on, we're going to come back and we're going to use a special edge sealing rubber to properly finish the edges off. But for now, the back cover is done. For the front cover, I'm repeating the exact same process I did for the back with my stamping tool and my rubber mallet, but I'm making sure only to press down these specific areas. That is so that we can create this shape here where this center part and these lines are raised as well as the border, but these inner parts here are pressed down to create depth. Let's see if you can see it. You can kind of see it, not really. This is really going to help to emphasize this design on the front cover. To attach the two halves of the cover together to create a functioning notebook, initially I was thinking of using some eyelets and some rings, kind of like a ring-bound book is, but then when I started making the notebook and I looked at the edges and the edge that I created around the cover and the size of the eyelets I had, I realized that the eyelets were gonna look a little bit goofy because they were just a smidge too big. So instead, I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna punch some holes into the front and the back, and then I'm gonna tie them together with some twine or something. I mean, it's a little jank. I think, in fairness, that something like a leather cording or some eyelets and some rings could in theory work, but we're just gonna do this because I think it's gonna look better. To punch the holes, I'm marking out where I want the holes to go, and then I'm just using this leather hole punch to create small holes in the cover. Now that the front and back covers are fully prepped, we are ready to move on to the dyeing process, which I am extremely excited for. I'm going to be using this walnut colored leather stain. Before we start dyeing, you need to make sure to wet the surface of your leather thoroughly. Before we start dyeing, we need to make sure that we wet the surface of our leather thoroughly so that we can help the dye spread evenly, very similarly to how you dye fabric. Before I go in with the stain, I'm making sure to really saturate my leather because I'm hoping that this might stop the dye from taking too darkly and will hopefully allow me to have some more control over building up the color depth so that I can go back with a paintbrush and create some shading around these edges that we did before. Here's a sample that I did earlier, which you can get a better idea of how the dye is going to look when it dries. It dries much lighter than it looks here. I think I left these for about a day to dry and they were ready to go, but you could probably just leave yours for like a couple of hours and they would be fine, especially if it's a hot day. But now that our covers are dyed, dry and ready to go, it is time to do our decorative edge stitching. And to do that, we're going to be using a stitch called a saddle stitch. Now, to do a saddle stitch on leatherworking, you're going to need a nice thick wax thread, and I believe that you can buy pre-waxed thread for leatherworking already, so it would probably be easier to buy that. I'm going to be cutting one long continuous piece of thread, but nothing too long because you don't want it to tangle while you're working with it. And then I'm going to be taking 2 needles and I'm going to be threading one on either side of the thread. This sounds really weird, but stay with me. I also recommend when you're doing this using some pliers because it can be very difficult to get those needles in and out of your leather. And I'm gonna do my best to explain what I'm doing. I'm so sorry if I explain it weirdly. I would definitely just recommend looking up a tutorial for a saddle stitch because I'm sure there is somebody out there who explains it better than I do. So I've got both of my needles threaded onto either end of one piece of the string, and then I'm gonna take one of them like this, and we're just gonna go into one of the holes, pull it through to either side, and I want to make sure that my thread stays even, so just pull that so it's even. And then I'm going to take the string that is on the top and I'm going to thread it, oops, in to one of the holes like so. And that will create one single stitch like that. So we just came in from the top and we threaded down into this hole here to create this stitch. And then the next needle is going to come back through that hole that we just went down in and out again towards the top so that it looks like, if it will focus, so that it looks like this. So I've come back out the hole that I went in, and then I'm going to go down into the next hole. I'm gonna put that needle down and grab my other needle. And that's gonna go back through that hole I just came through, but out towards the top this time. Oh my God, can I get it through? Sometimes it's a bit hard and you need to use pliers to pull it through. So back out through the hole that I just went down and through, but with my other needle. So we're slowly creating that stitch line that's gonna run all the way around the edge. So I'll try and do it nice and close so you can see. So I've just taken one needle through to create a stitch. So I'm picking up the needle that I used last time, and we're only ever using one needle at a time. And this needle is gonna go in through this hole here that we just came through from the front. Gonna push that needle in that hole, out towards the front, if I can. There we go. Pull that out towards the front. And when that's out towards the front, I'm gonna go into this empty hole here, the next one over, and through that hole and out towards the back again, and that creates the stitch. So then when that's done, you're gonna put that needle down that you just used, and you're gonna pick up this one here, and then that's gonna go through the front and then through the back again. All right, so the stitching on the front piece of the palm quire is done. The stitches kind of blend into the dye a little bit, but you still get the texture of it, so it kind of still works. This actually didn't take me as long as I thought it was gonna take. I definitely recommend that when you're doing the saddle stitch, you have like a clamp or something that you can put your leather in while you're working on it so you can have both your hands free. I did not, so I just held it, pushed the needle through, swapped hands, pushed the needle through, which took me a lot longer than it probably would have if I had a clamp, but needs must, it worked and it came out great and I'm very happy with it. Now that our leather is dyed and our stitching is done, it is time to line these pieces and then make some paper so that we can assemble everything. But before we can line it, we need to attach this little strap here to the back of the cover. I'm gonna score the leather using a box cutter to allow the glue to seep into the surface of the leather and have a stronger grip. If you don't do this, it is probably just gonna peel off the surface because it is just a smooth surface and it won't really have much for the glue to grip onto. So make sure you score all of the pieces to rough them up before you glue them together. I'm just using some 𝐻𝐻𝐸 glue for this as it's a pretty strong adhesive and it's just what I had on hand already, but you can also use a contact cement or a leather specific glue, but contact cements work just fine. Once that's dried, I'm applying a thin layer to the underneath of each cover piece and then using this brown suede fabric to line the pieces. Fun fact, this suede is actually my Mollymawk cosplay boots that I cut up because I did not have any suede on hand and I could not be bothered going to find any, but I did have my old Mollymawk boots, which, to be honest, if I ever wear this cosplay again, I will probably remake these, so I cut them up for lining. To make the paper that goes inside the palm quire, I just took some watercolor paper and I dyed it using tea. The watercolor paper part is important because it is a much thicker paper that is made specifically for using watercolor on it, so it's not going to wrinkle if you wet it. I then used the pattern that I made for the cover and roughly cut these pieces into circles. I'm also taking some sandpaper to roughen up and soften the edges of the paper a little bit so it looks a little more worn and less like I've just cut it with scissors. So if you watched my previous Coco videos, you know that as it was getting to the end of my build, we were reaching basically the week of the competition, so we were crunching big time, which means I did not get any footage of me finishing my palm quire. So what I'm gonna have to do is pretty much just explain the last few steps I did and show you pictures of the final product so you can kind of get an idea of how I finished this off. I do apologize. So once the paper was finished, I basically just took my rubber mallet and my awl and I just whacked 2 holes into the paper so that I could thread the thonging through and assemble everything. The reason I didn't use a hole punch is because a hole punch would look too man-made and also because the holes would be far too big and I really just needed a hole small enough that I could thread some thonging through. To assemble everything, I just used the same thread that we used to do all of this decorative top stitching. I took a couple of pieces, braided it together to thicken it up because again we were on a time crunch and I had nothing else on hand, and I pretty much just threaded that through all of the paper in the front and back cover, tied it off on the inside so you wouldn't see the knot, and then I melted the knot with a lighter so that it sealed that knot and it wouldn't come undone. To finish off the edges of the leather, now that everything is fully assembled, I went in with this thing which is like edging rubber, and I just took a Q-tip and I painted that onto my edges to hide all of the raw leather and make it feel a little more professional. It's a little messy still. It is my first time using edging rubber, so it is certainly not the best, but it did the job and it doesn't look raw and unfinished anymore, so yay! And with that, that is our palm quire fully finished and ready to go. I am very proud of how this came out. As my second ever leatherworking project, it honestly isn't too bad and it really feels like something that would be in the universe. It doesn't feel like a cosplay prop. It feels like a genuine notebook, which is exactly what I wanted, so I am incredibly happy and proud of it. To make a little holder for it to go on my belt, instead of hanging it off the edge of the belt, I just created this little like I don't even know what it is. It's like a little notebook holder that just slides onto my belt, and this just sits nicely inside here like so. Nothing fancy, but it gets the job done and it holds it in place, so it works. All right. With that, our palm quire is finally finished and I am so proud of it and very excited to be done with this project now. I hope that this was somewhat interesting and informative to you. Please remember that this is like my second time ever doing leatherworking, so don't take anything I say as gospel. Make sure to do all of your own research as well, but it is a basic look into what the beginner skills for leatherworking are and the beginner techniques for leatherworking. And if you haven't seen my other Coco videos, then make sure you go check those out because I build her cloak, her hat, and the rest of the dress in that video. So hopefully that'll be interesting. Right, with all that said and done, we are finally finished. So I am going to go start on my next project and I hope I'll see you again very soon.